Hey guys, I want to welcome you to another edition of. Actually, this is probably one of our first editions of our halftime chat R&B podcast. I'm going to have a special guest live. He's a writer, music historian, and owner of Soul of Black Music Notes. Blogspot, which is dedicated to the preservation of Black music. So I'm going to invite Sheldon in, and we're just going to be able to have a talk and chat about all things music, some New Jack Swing. We've just recently celebrated 30 years of Bobby Brown, his Bobby album, and we should be going live right now.
Okay.
Yes, it is going live. So, guys, I want to walk you to, I think, one of my first editions of this R&B podcast on Halftime Chat. And, you really got a friend of mine who I've been connected with for our love of New Jack Swing and Teddy. It is Sheldon Taylor. He is a writer, music historian. He's the owner of Soul of Black. It's a website that just is dedicated to for the historic preservation of Black music. And so, if you guys have recently realized that the Bobby album, which is one of my favorite, I think that and Make It Last Forever album are my two favorite. We just celebrated 30 years, and my favorite producer of all times, Teddy, did the bulk of the production. But Sheldon, I mean, I want to welcome you. I mean, it's good to finally get to meet you and see you and stuff. But just to jump in, I mean, what are your remembrance of the Bobby album?
I want to go back to, I guess, the summer of '92, and when the album was coming out, it was a big buzz on the fan base side because people were really excited about the album coming out because it had already been 4 years since the Don't Be Cruel album. And the
Yeah.
Don't Be Cruel album was very significant, obviously, because um, that album was a reintroduction to Bobby, and it solidified him as a solo artist. So when you look at what Thriller and the videos that came off the album, what it did for Michael Jackson, it was the same thing for Bobby Brown.
Yeah.
When you look at Don't Be Cruel. And the Bobby album was a perfect follow-up. The reason that made it a great follow-up is that there were a lot of ingredients on the Bobby album that were a continuation of what was on Don't Be Cruel. I like to call the Bobby album R&B's lost modern album because when
Oh,
it dropped in 1992, it dropped during the time when the music was changing. Obviously, West Coast hip hop is coming in.
yeah.
The music is kind of slowing down. Prior to that, the energy of the New Jack Swing, the dance styles, everything that was all encapsulated in that time period, let's say from 88 to 1991. And then all of a sudden in 1992, enter the Chronic, enter
Mm.
Snoop. And you're starting to see the rise of a lot of West Coast artists, and the music is kind of slowing down. And even though the R&B it still has the vibe of the New Jack Swing flavor, what's happening is that music is starting to morph into what we know now as hip hop soul.
Mm.
It becomes more sample oriented. The beats per minute are a lot slower. It's more about the head nod. The dances reflect the music. So the high energy of the New Jack Swing music is kind of making that transition into hip hop soul.
Wow.
And when you look at the Bobby album, I like to compare it to Run DMC's 1988 album, Tougher Than Leather, which was a follow up to their smash of '86, Raising Hell. I like to compare it to Michael Jackson's Bad album. Bobby kind of falls in the line of those other two albums because what happens is had all of these three albums been released a year earlier.
Yeah.
I think the reception might have been a little different. They might have done a little bit better in terms of record sales, even though all of those albums sold a lot.
Yeah.
The reception, you have to kind of just drop that music at the right time.
Yeah.
And Bobby kind of fell into the cracks, because when you look at Run DMC's Raising Hell back in '86, that was one of the rap albums that kind of elevated rap to more crossover. It turned Run DMC into major mega superstars. When you look in terms of Tougher Than Leather coming after that, it dropped a year and a half after that instead of '87. Prior to that, Run DMC was dropping an album every single year. However, they had some contract disputes that kind of slowed their momentum. So by the time they dropped Tougher Than Leather in 1988, you had all of these classic albums in 1988 that were pushing rap music in a different direction. And even though Tougher Than Leather sold 1.5 million copies, Run DMC weren't the leaders of that movement anymore. The styles had changed. So now Run DMC was trying to play catch up.
Okay.
When you look at Michael Jackson's Bad, it comes out in '87. At the time, obviously, the Minneapolis sound was still huge. The album dropped in the summer of '87. But 6 months later, or really, when you look at fall '87, you start to see the shift in Black music. You start seeing Teddy's music starting to come out. Kumo D's How You Like Me Now, Keith Sweat's I Wanna, Johnny Kemp's Just Got Paid. Fast forward to '88. The music is now in effect. And during this time, Michael Jackson is still putting out videos. The album is still selling. At the time, at its peak, it might have sold 35 million copies or whatever, maybe 7 or 8 million copies less of Thriller. So the album was big. But when '88 rolled around, the music kind of changed, and Bad kind of sounded kind of old. Still a great album, but aesthetically, it found itself in a totally different space compared to what was going on in '88. And the Bobby album was the same way, because for me, the album was excellent. It was superior. But when in '92, when Bobby dropped, that's also the time Mary J. Blige's was the 411 drop. And when you look at both of those albums, the sound is totally different. So it's almost like when you go back and you saw what Run DMC was doing when they came after all the Grandmaster Flashes and everybody like that, and their music was stripped down. Well, What's the 411 was in that same space. The music was stripped down. It was sample driven. So compared to what Bobby's was, Bobby's album slipped through the cracks. Even though the album sold 2 million copies, and there's a moment in time in '92 where the album goes #1, then it drops down, then it goes in #1. It kind of switches off and trades places with What's the 411 for the #1 spot.
Wow.
And the album sales, obviously, a lot of videos are coming off the album, but compared to what the Don't Be Cruel album did, in its initial run, it sold about 7 to 8 million copies. Ultimately, it went up to double figures in sales beyond Diamond, over 10 million. But at that point, the music was shifting. You have a lot more artists. The landscape was changing. So that's why I call Bobby's album, the third album, the R&B's Lost album. But it's still great. It's still superior. What makes that album great is it's really almost a continuation of Don't Be Cruel. So when you look at how the album is set up, obviously you hear the first track, which is the refrain, the melody, the keyboard riffs that open up the Don't Be Cruel album. And then when you hear the turntable scratches off, and all of a sudden Humping Around comes on. So it kind of references what he did, kind of almost like what Rakim was saying when he came out with his Follow the Leader album, 1988, that replaced the follow-up to Paid in Full. He says, I was giving you time to get the last one straight. So when you look at the Bobby album, it kind of followed up on that, to where it drops, Humping Around comes on, and then Humping Around kind of continues the theme of the Don't Be Cruel, because it deals with a male-female relationship, the push and pull, and the song's content lyrically, obviously Bobby is pushing back against rumors about him cheating on his girlfriend. So if you go back to a record that dropped around 1977 by a group called the Emotions, they had a song called "Don't Ask My Neighbor." It's an R&B ballad. The theme is the same because you're dealing with rumors, you're dealing with cheating, all of that. And it kind of, in this particular song, you know, Bobby is kind of, it's a finger wag. He's kind of like admonishing his girlfriend, like, hey, I'm not doing that. The same way he was admonishing his girlfriend in Don't Be Cruel. So you see that theme. And then when you look at a song like Getaway, Getaway kind of continues the theme of My Prerogative. There's lyrics in My Prerogative where Bobby is dealing with the frustrations of being judged as an individual and his response to that. But when you look at the lyrics in Getaway, same situation. He's dealing with the pressures. He's dealing with people, and he's looking for an escape. So, you know, Getaway kind of continues that theme of My Prerogative. So there's a lot of familiar moments in Bobby that kind of reference the first album. For me, the production on the album was superior. Obviously, when you start looking at the sequencing of the album, you see a lot of LA and Faces records, and there's Teddy's records, and it kind of, you know, repeats the theme once again of Don't Be Cruel, because the lead off single, Don't Be Cruel, was the title track. So when you go to Bobby, the lead off song was Humping Around.
Yeah,
Follow up song. Go ahead.
But I remember seeing an interview with Louis Sal Jr., who was the then president of MCA of Black Music, saying that his biggest regret is that he thought he could emulate the sequencing of Don't Be Cruel by releasing two LA and Babyface tracks and then follow up with Teddy. But it seems as if he missed a trick where Teddy's productions, like maybe Two Can Play That Game or Getaway or That's the Way Love Goes, were probably much stronger tracks that should have led out the album instead of the Humping Around and Good Enough.
You know what? I agree with you. When I look back at that album, for me, the favorite moments of that album were Teddy's productions.
Yeah.
Bar none. And the reason why is because you saw an elevation in Teddy's production. First of all, you got to give Teddy a lot of credit, because that album, the album follows a sequence of work that he's doing, let's say between 90 and 91 going into 92, where he's on a creative tear. Because understand, there's the Guy thing, you know, there's the remixes on the side that's happening in 90 and 91. Even though the group breaks up around 91, they're still releasing singles.
Okay.
Like your favorite song, Let's Stay Together.
Yeah,
there's a single that comes out in 92.
Oh.
So the album is still on the charts. It's, you know, singles are coming off. And during that time, he's going from Guy and the Jane Chow remixes. And remember, during this time in 91, he's also doing Michael Jackson, right? And then right behind it, you got tracks for the Bobby album. In between that, he's doing tracks for the House Party 2 soundtrack.
Oh, yes, why you get Big Bob,
You know, you got Juice, Tammy Lucas, and all of that. So, you know, he's on a creative tear between 90 and 92. So when you look at all the music that he's putting out, great music, classic music, that momentum. So I felt that the album should have leaned toward a lot of Teddy's productions first. I remember seeing an interview that Teddy did, and he kind of briefly referenced that it was a lot of politics behind the scenes in terms of why the LaFace records got pushed first.
Okay.
Because if you look at that album, the majority of the singles are LaFace records. Humping Around.
And it was good enough. Yeah. And then it's, I think it was not Loving You Down, but yeah, it was, but they weren't the strongest when you think of the
No.
album. They weren't the strongest, and it didn't. I mean, as Humping Around was, but it wasn't as, you know, especially a song like Two Can Play That Game. You know, they had a movie called Two Can Play That Game. The dynamics of that type of relationship was probably a lot bigger at that time. That type of lyric, and I thought that would have been a trick that they could have gone by. Even Rex and Effects you know, had Rump Shakers. So even thinking about using That's the Way Love Goes featuring Arkell and Rex and Effect, probably also with bigger, stronger tracks and stuff. So as I said, it must have been the politics, but it wasn't a missed opportunity. And you know, Teddy says, yeah, I think because Bobby, even doing something like, We Got Something in Common, because Whitney was the biggest star at the time, and then having that as the second single also could have done something. But I have no idea how they planned the marketing with that.
Yeah, when you look at back, because you know, when you look at the way albums are set up now, or now everything is streaming, but there was a better synergy for albums coming out. I guess the best person who I can kind of align that with is Beyonce.
Okay.
Beyonce is very savvy when it comes, and Jay-Z. They put out albums, the synergies there. If they got guests, everything, the setup is great. Not saying that the Bobby setup was not great, because there was a lot of publicity done with that album.
Yeah.
But I think in that moment, the Teddy Riley records should have gotten a lot more attention. For me, I love the chemistry between Bobby and Teddy on Two Can Play That Game, because you see that chemistry. It's a chemistry that, even though Bobby's not necessarily like engaging with Teddy on My Prerogative, but you see that it's like a reference. You know, it recalls that energy that they have between each other.
Yeah.
And the record is really dope. You know, Two Can Play That Game is nice. You know, Loving You Down was great.
Oh yeah.
Just, you know, the
One
I'm gonna
More
tell you the
Time.
reason. All of those, exactly. All of those records were excellent, and I think they captured Bobby's range.
Yeah.
You know, not no knock on the LaFace records, because the LaFace records were great, because they gave Bobby, they showed the polish, like Good Enough kind of elevated him, was a ballad, you know, and you know, he's polished there. And then of course Humping, the lead single, so they're trying to follow that trend of Don't Be Cruel or whatever. There's another record that they did, but really, to me, when I look at that album, Bobby is, it's almost like, to me, that's a Teddy Riley album.
Yeah.
I see it as a Teddy Riley album. So when you look at, once again, Two Can Play That Game, it had that rough edge that suited Bobby, and it was just dope. And then when you start looking at Getaway also had, like I said earlier, the strains of the My Prerogative in terms of the lyrics. And then you look at the other records that he did, whether it's One More Night,
There was Loving You
Something
Down.
in Common,
Something in
Loving Me,
Common.
Yes. Then those records captured Bobby's range. They captured his range in terms of that. And I think they would, and they videos were made from those records. It would have been great. To me, the worst thing in the world, and I think because that album had been out for a while and they were trying to just really milk the singles, I did not like the remixes. I hated the remixes. The remixes, you know, to all respect, but the remixes did not capture the essence of the songs. The originals were very strong. I wrote an article about the Bobby's album on my website, Souls of Black Note at Blogspot, and it talks about, you know, when that album dropped, the musical climate at the time, and the videos that came along with it. When you saw the videos from Don't Be Cruel, they really captured Bobby in his element as a singular artist. You saw the swagger, you saw the choreography, it was him. But then when you saw some of the videos that he was doing, I'll just say from Humping Around, I'll say Getaway, you got and That's How Love Goes, That's the Way Love Is.
That's the Way Love
Is. He's there, he's got the background dancing. So it's almost like you were ahead of everybody but then you kind of like, I don't say he lost a step, but then I guess it was the style, because more, it's less, you don't see a lot of his dancing.
Yeah.
He's got all the background dancers with him, kind of like when you see the BBD. You got the whole thing, and it kind of pulls away from his charisma and the magnitude of his stage presence. And I think that
Yeah.
those records that Teddy made, they would have made excellent videos for him to really just come across and dance and do his thing versus having, all of the female dancers that he had. No disrespecting them, because a lot of them were in a lot of other music videos. But I think that Bobby Brown, the Bobby album, should have been a setup in the same manner of, you look at Usher's album. You see his 3 Run. You'll see My Way, 8701, Confessions. So it was a setup. It was a progression.
Yeah.
And the Bobby album could have been that. And it just, for me, it was a missed opportunity. But again, a lot of media, a lot of press.
Yeah.
But I just think that the Teddy songs would have given the emphasis on Teddy's productions, would have given the album, a lot more weight, a
Yeah.
lot more longevity, because really the pocket of that album, even though they had singles coming out going into 93, but when you look at the arrival of hip hop soul, it kind of changed the momentum of the way music was going. So that album got lost in the cracks.
Yeah.
But in all due respect, you got to remember is that Don't Be Cruel comes out in 88. So let's say from 88 to 89 to 90, he's on tour. He's on tour for like 2.5 straight years. So imagine if he would have came straight off to on tour, went in the studio, made that album. But understandably, that might not have happened, because obviously you see what Teddy was doing. He was doing the Michael Jackson
Yeah.
tracks and the
Yeah.
Guy thing or whatever. So we just, we really don't know.
Yeah.
And they had a period or whatever where they had their, issues or whatever of estrangement or whatnot. So, just a lot of different things going on. Because if you look at the one single, it was called Something in My Heart. It was an up-tempo record that Bobby Brown had come out with, and it
Yeah.
was more like
Yeah.
a rap record.
Yeah.
And I think that if that record he came out with, I remember seeing him on an MTV Awards
Yeah.
show
MTV Award. I
with
think
all,
yeah.
and he was performing that record, and the record was cool. But I'm glad that he didn't go in that direction, and he went to L.A. Reid, and he went back to Teddy to go ahead to do the album. Because for me, even though Don't Be Cruel is signature, and Roni and My Prerogative, and even Humping Around, those songs have a lot of sentimental value, because once again, they were a reintroduction to Bobby Brown to the public.
Yeah.
And we took to those songs.
Yeah.
But I think Bobby was a stronger album in terms of the compositions. And you got to look at what Teddy was doing on those records. Production was great,
Yeah.
but you also have to look at the background vocals of those songs.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think he took background vocals to another level with that, the way they harmonized and came in and stuff. And,
Yeah.
Listening to people like John Marie, who's the engineer on that. So, Levi, who was in Blackstreet, who sang backgrounds, Tammy Lucas saying she couldn't perform because of her voice, but, all the others flew in. And even Eric Williams said, when they were doing their stuff and they got to hear a preview of that, they just thought, wow, this is on another level. And,
But think about what you just said, another level, because what happens is the Another Level album, when you look at the background vocals on that, it recalls the Bobby album.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do wonder if Teddy even, because the Bobby album reminds me of Make It Last Forever, because it's almost as if Teddy wasn't thinking, he just created. Because when I seen him subsequently, it's almost as if, okay, I want to try and make a good record. And so it doesn't pull off. But when he did the Make It Last Forever album, and when he did the Bobby album, it's almost like he left everything out there creatively, and it was just magic. That's why those two albums to me just seem to be his best composition of work. You know, when it comes to, I mean, I think he did about 8.5, 7.5 on Make It Last Forever. He did 7 on the Bobby album. It just felt like he just says, okay, I'm just gonna bring out all the magic on this stuff, and he just did. But I mean, if we move, because I mean, Teddy has been on the news recently. I mean, you know, we both share our admiration for Teddy as the creator, as an amazing music creator. But as somebody who looks at history, because I remember when you showed me an article of GR Production when they're signing the stuff, and you know, and this is before I even started talking to people about Gene Griffin and all that stuff. But as a creator, when you think about Teddy as a creator, as a producer, when was his best work? Was it after? Was it before GR Productions? Did that sort of stifle him, or was he just doing work for hire, or was it after GR Production? What are your thoughts?
I'm going to tell you my favorite Teddy period is the 87-ish, 88 to about roughly the 90, about 90. That's my favorite period, because when I first heard about him, it was just strange. I mean, I had heard the records, the show, Be Fast, Whop It, and all these other type of things, but this was during the period where there was no internet. There weren't any publications dedicated to the music. So you just basically heard what you heard on the radio. And at that time, you know, unless you were from the New York area, you would there, because again, Black music was pretty much on a whole, it was his own entity. So that meant if you were a fan, the fan base kind of revolved, Black music revolved around its own orbit. This was, you know, before SoundScan, before records being debuted on the Hot 100, going to #1.
Yeah.
R&B used to be a type of music, and it kind of still is to that matter, is that it was always on the peripheral. R&B's value to the outside world was its commercial value.
Wow.
If it could sell records, R&B was great. But the fan base was the component that drove R&B music. So when you look in terms of, I'll just say the 70s. 1970s is kind of when the music grew up. The crossroads between concepts, commercial value, the artistic growth, all of that, all of those great music, all the great albums that we saw that came out in the 1970s, all those great groups. So that's the period where Black music grew up. In the 80s, now Black music is going to a more commercial component. Obviously, it's been well documented, the Anita Bakers, the Princes, the Michael Jacksons, the Lionel Richies, you know. But then what happens is when the 90s rolls around, the 90s is a younger reinterpretation of the music in the past, which is what makes it special. So when I heard Teddy doing the music, I heard the music before I knew who he was. And when I started seeing his name in magazines around late 87, I thought he was an older guy. I thought he was an older cat. And this is the time when I thought this is when I Wanna was out.
Okay.
So that record was out. And I didn't know who he was. I'm starting to hear these records and they're sounding different because, you know, and I remember mid 87, I joined the service. And at that time, Minneapolis Sound was popping. It was everything.
Okay.
And
Jim Jam and Terry Lewis guys.
Yes. And then on my way to going overseas, all the music is starting to change, the rhythms. You know, I'm hearing I Wanna, and I Wanna sounds nothing like Jam and Lewis. I'm hearing the Kool Moe Dee record, How You Like Me Now. I'm hearing the James Brown, and it's nothing like what's out there. So now I go overseas and there's no Black radio. So I got to play catch up. So I'm hearing these songs and I'm hearing to see this guy, Teddy Riley. And I'm like, who is this person? So then the very first time I see them on the Apollo. And you've seen the clip
Yeah.
around 88, they're performing. And I'm seeing Guy. And they don't look like whoever was out 6 months to a year before. They don't look like Cameo.
Oh, okay.
You know, they don't, it's just, they had the goatees, they had the look, they had the hair. And I'm looking at these guys and I'm like, okay, those two look like brothers. And, you know, it was just like you trying to figure out who is who. But then I would say right around like mid 88, it was, the records were coming. And then I heard the Guy album with Groove Me and Teddy's Jam and all those records or whatever. And the album was, it was great because it was a totally different sound, it was a totally different vibe. And for me, I grew up in the era of all those 80s groups, specifically the Gap Band. So when I heard Guy, it was like, it was the Gap Band. And for a hot minute, I didn't want to like the Guy album because I'm like, these guys, this is the Gap Band all the way. I'm listening to Aaron and he's doing his thing. And I'm like, and I'm gonna tell you, this is a funny story, is that when I heard that album, I listened to it, I listened to it again. And I said, you know what? It's not gonna work. I went to my record collection and I pulled out this old Gap Band album, right? Looked on the back, found the address to the record company and their manager. And at that time, I was kind of dabbling in songwriting, not too much. But in my mind, I was like, I wrote a letter. I literally mailed it. And the letter was like, hey, these guys are coming out. They got music that sounds like you. I could bring you back. Now, at this time, I'm like 18. Okay. So I don't know any better. But I'm like, I could bring you back. But then when I played the album again, I was like, man, I was hooked. I was hooked. So I lived in Tower Records. So anything that had Teddy Riley, GR Productions, I was buying it, man.
Wow.
Everything. I was loving it. I was just, I had to get it. And I remember, that's why I love that era so much, because it was a new type of music. Because people talk about the merger with the hip hop and the R&B, but it wasn't just the beats and the production. It was also the way the records were arranged vocally. Because if you listen to any type of Teddy Riley production that came out, let's say between 88 and about like 92, but specifically that 88 to 90 period.
Yeah.
It's a way that they're singing, you know, it's a Teddy Riley production. Mm. Especially like when you get to the bridge of the record, because the arrangement kind of changes. And the best way I can kind of frame it is if you listen to My Prerogative, and at the bridge, when Bobby goes into the hook, tell me, why can't I live my life? Mm. And when you listen to it kind of goes up. The tension, the bridge, and at most Teddy Riley records, the productions that he was doing, everybody's singing that way. Everybody's singing that way, like at the bridge. You go back and listen to a lot of those records that he produced, and you hear it. And it was so dope because everybody started to copy those records. They copied the arrangements, the vocal arrangements. They copied the riffs. You know, sometimes he would do the little keyboard riff in the beginning or whatever, like you hear on Let's Chill, that style of keyboard, or you hear the keyboard solo that he would be doing in the middle. Yeah, when they call. Everybody was trying to do that. Everybody was coming out trying to sing like Aaron. Now, mind you, Aaron is coming out of the Stevie Wonder, Charlie Wilson vein. But in 1988, I got to tell you, is that prior to when Aaron was coming out, you had people that was, it was the Freddie Jackson, Luther Vandross, who was very smooth. It was very easy. You had Elder Barges doing his thing. So you had a lot of tenor, falsettos, Howard Hewitt, Freddie Jackson, like I said, Luther. But then when Aaron came, Aaron brought that urgency church vocal style back, because at that time, Black music was extremely polished. Because remember, in 88, anybody who's listening to that music when it's coming out, they're 18, 19, 20 years old. But everybody who was making music, the Luther Vandrosses and people like that, these people are in their mid 30s, 33, 34, 35. So it's a different approach to the music. So if I'm a person, I'm listening to what Teddy is doing. First of all, he's producing the records as if they were rap records. Because when you look at that whole New Jack Swing component, I'm listening to him and you can tell that Teddy is a student of Black music, because you're hearing interpolations of previous Black music that's in his record. So it's almost like the equivalent of what a lot of rappers were doing in the late 70s and the 80s. They would kind of take routines from other records and they would interpret it in their songs, you know, the melodies or whatever. And he was kind of doing that. So if you listen to a record that's like Girl, I Got My Eye on You, you know,
by today,
it goes back to Carrie Lucas's Show Me Where You Coming From. It's a Solar record, so you got to look that one up. You listen to My Prerogative, you listen to the vocal melody of My Prerogative, and then you go back and you listen to a record that dropped in 80 by a group called the Reddings. They were Otis Redding's sons. They had a record called Remote Control. You'll hear the melody of Remote Control. You hear that in My Prerogative. You listen to Just Got Paid. There's a record that came out maybe almost 10 years prior, 7 to 8 years prior, by a group called Bell and James called Living It Up on Friday Night. You know, and they talk about Just Got Paid, but you'll hear a lot of riffs that are in those records, energy from those records, and you hear them in a lot of his music. You know, you listen to a record like the remix to New Jack Swing, and he's riffing like there's a guy in Kool and the Gang. His name was Donald Boyce. There's a he was on a record called Jungle Boogie, and he's riffing. He's not singing. He's doing all these vocal sounds and all of this stuff like that. That's in Jungle Boogie, and you hear Teddy doing that in New Jack Swing. So the thing I loved about those early records that he was doing, those records captured the energy of the records that were out before. So when you hear them, but the unique thing about it, and the reason why I love those records so much, is that it kind of changed the game because it made young brothers want to be producers. So it's different from guys on the rap side, because they might have started out DJing, pause tapes and everything, and they're gradually getting into production. But on the R&B side, you never had young Black producers. Everybody was Kashif. Everybody was like in their mid 30s or older producing. The concept of a younger producer coming in, and don't get me wrong, there could have been some people, but on the magnitude that Teddy was doing it, I hate to say first, but he was ahead of the curve as a producer. And then he was right in the pocket. The timing was perfect, because the Generation X era, and that's the era that the people who were born roughly between 1965 and 1980, that's that pocket. That's us. So the music that we're hearing is right in the pocket for our taste, because we're growing up on rap music, but we still know the Earth, Wind and Fire. We still know the Motown records, you know, so all those records inform us. So all of those things are all in these records that he's doing, and all the other records that are coming out by other artists who are doing the exact same thing. So it makes it really, really special. But then one of the unique things that Teddy did is he took the best of all those different components of music's past, and he put it into one. Not so much just the sound. I'll just say the singing. Let's use the singing for one example. If you listen to an R&B record in the 70s and 80s, it might start off real slow. They'll sing at a certain pitch, and then they'll go ahead and gradually build up to this whole dramatic build up, and they'll come down again. Perfect example, you hear Whitney Houston record or something like that.
Yeah.
But when those new Jack Swing records, it's like they just cut all the guts out of all the excess, all of that music that was out in the 70s and 80s, and they just kept the best part. So when you listen to someone like Aaron Hall singing, he's going to get you from the jump. He's going straight for the jugular. He's not going to wait until the bridge to go off. He's going to hit you straight from the gut, right? And then also with the records, the production, the music, okay? The music is in those R&B records. They kind of build up. They're elongated. The up-tempo records might be elongated or whatever, but he's taking the best part of the records, the rhythm, all of that, and he's putting them in there. And it's really, he's really critical as a producer, because funk music was dead, because what happened was music in the 80s was becoming polished. So everything that made up funk music, all the many band members and the different type of live instrumentation, when the music videos were coming in, all of a sudden it was focused on the lead singer, focused on the key person. So now it was to have 50, 10 guys on stage or whatever, it just didn't fit that component. The music had to be smoothed out. So a lot of that edginess of the music kind of like it just disappeared because the music had changed. So he came and he brought the funkiness of the music back, because it was gone. But he made it for us. But the thing about it is that he was his time, but he was before his time, because when he was doing these records, R&B was still an adult industry. So remember, just Teddy, when he's coming out with these records in 88 and 89, he's 21, 22, he's a young guy. But the music, everybody's much older. They're 10, 15, 20 years older. So the music is still skewed old, even though he's in. So he's kind of like in between, but the notoriety and everything that he's getting the notoriety, so to speak, but he's not like huge. He doesn't hit the magnitude of a Jam and Lewis or someone like that, because the music is still older.
Yeah.
So it's like and that's the misfortune that he had, because that came a little bit later. Even though internally in our age group, we loved him.
Yeah.
But outside of that, a lot of artists were like, if you were 35, they didn't see it. They didn't see the musicality in the records, but he had that hot sound and he was doing everybody. It's a window, man. He's doing Stephanie Mills. Yeah. He's doing the Jacksons. He's doing a lot of people.
Yeah, James Ingram,
he's doing
JT
a lot.
Taylor. Yeah.
He's doing JT. He's doing the remixes and all that. So the sound is there, but it's almost as if like the business kind of affected him, because he's dealing with all of that, and it's kind of crazy because you're dealing with everything that's going on behind the music. So the music component is there, but he's not getting the notoriety. Of course, within our age group, I saw one of your videos where Damien was talking about how they didn't win a Grammy, they didn't win American Music Award, they didn't win Soul Train Music Awards, and I can kind of understand that, because a lot of people look back at these artists, they say, "Oh, so and so didn't win a Grammy," but I challenge that, because all you have to look at is who else was competing during that period. So if you go look up in any year, let's go from 88, 89, 90, 91, and you look at the winners, Grammy winners, American Music Award winners, Soul Train Award winners, but you also have to look at who else was competing in that category. And you will see that most of the people who were winning during that time was like a Luther Vandross, it was Anita Baker, people like that. They were older because the industry was still a more mature person's game. So they basically hadn't caught up with the young music until the 90s are rolling around. Until you start getting people like the Puffies and all that. Now they're starting to infiltrate the music industry as young people. But the music industry across the board, it's an older game. So they're not looking at the magnitude, because again, that's the industry. So when you see guys doing what they're doing, it's going to fall on deaf ears beyond the fan base, because at that point, you got to understand, Luther Vandross is huge.
Yeah.
He's still
Yeah.
huge in the 80s. Freddie Jackson is huge in the 80s. Anita Baker is huge. So right now, Guy is caught between, they're like the new music, but they're caught in between what's going on now and then what's around the corner.
Mm.
And those music, the records that they were doing, Teddy's music, it was great. I loved it. I loved the samples. I loved trying to figure out what the sample was. And at that point in time, I thought he was playing the instruments and doing everything. I'm listening to a record like My Fantasy and all the sounds, and he's sampling a record, Sarone's Rocket in the Pocket. He's sampling James Brown records, break beats. And I'm like, okay, how is he playing all of these? I mean, I couldn't get it. I'm like, how is he doing all of this? Because at that time, the way we're up on production, we're up on all of that stuff wasn't like that back then. Unless you were in the music industry or you were actually doing music yourself. But if you were a fan, you just liked the music. You didn't know.
Yeah.
You didn't know what was going on behind the scenes, how he's putting the records together. There weren't no platforms like what you have. So we were just in the dark. We were just loving the music.
Yeah.
And I just think that those early records that's my favorite time. But as he moved out of that, I think the Bobby album is one of his greatest crowning achievements.
Yeah.
Because one, if you look at that, everything's kind of in place now, because he's got the budget, because he's with MCA now.
Yeah.
So he's got the budget, you've got your own studio, you've got your crew of background singers, you got everything at your disposal. So really, if you look at that record, it's like, to me, Teddy's production on that album is the equivalent of him being like a Quincy Jones on that album. He's got all the ingredients together. You got the songwriters, you got the background singers, you got all the components that are there, and then you got Bobby.
Yeah.
So when you look at, that's what makes that album so special. Because when you listen to the other album, Don't Be Cruel, captures Bobby in that vein. But when you listen to it, it's not as seamless as Bobby. He's going in, obviously the records are dope. They're being written directly for him or whatever. It's great. But it captures Bobby in his element as an artist in terms of growth, the range, even the Face records. And then there's records that Bobby's producing on his own, that record, but the range, the songwriting, in terms of New Jack Swing, to me, that record represented a maturation of New Jack Swing.
Yeah. One of the things
conceptually, creatively, go ahead.
Yeah, no,
go ahead.
A lot of people are probably just getting news about a person called Gene Griffin, and GR Production, and the role that Teddy played, because Teddy has been talking a lot more about it. So a lot of people are like, who is this Gene guy? From the research you did, how was he able to get away with having the writing credits on My Prerogative or 2300 Jackson Street, or anything that Teddy did, and Teddy's name wasn't listed in there? How was he able to get away with that when people would have seen, well, he wasn't in the studio?
Okay, well, I'm gonna tell you this is, I'm an avid researcher, and I remember looking at those records in 88, 89, 90. I mean, anything pertaining to New Jack Swing, I was on it. Articles, magazines, newspapers, the albums. Here's the deal. You already know, Teddy had a deal with Zomba.
Okay, and that's
right? He had a deal with Zomba to do records with them. But if you look at, there's a window when Teddy is doing records for Jive Zomba artists. Obviously, one of the earliest ones, he does the Rap's New Generation record.
Okay.
All right. So that group who does that record, they're signed to Jive Records.
Okay.
All right. They're signed to Jive Records. you're doing records for Kumo D. Kumo D is signed to Jive Records. He's a Jive artist. So he's doing records for Jive, and that's Zomba Publishing. That's Zomba. Now he has a publishing company with them. That's the publishing company is called Don Ryle.
Don Ryle, yeah.
DON/RL. Okay, you look at albums or whatever. You didn't look at the Guy album. You'll see that that was his publishing company with Zomba. But then what happened was when he got with Gene got his own publishing deal, and Gene's publishing company was called Cal Gene, and that publishing company was with Virgin. It was with Virgin. So when you look in terms of that, that's how the Boy George connection got there, is because Boy George was a Virgin artist.
Okay.
You know, when you look at a lot of productions, if you go and look at the productions that has Gene's name on it, you will see Cal Gene / Virgin. And what was happening was, with Gene being the manager, Gene is securing the production deals, but the production deals are going through his publishing company. So when he's sticking his name on these records that he's not even writing, goes his production company. See, understand now, when you look at what's happening now, everybody in the past maybe 15, 20 years, everybody's business savvy. He's publishing and this, but you got to realize back then it wasn't that way. You got to realize there weren't young people in the music industry like that. And the ones that were coming in, like New Edition, they were signed directly to a management company. They weren't signed directly to the MCA. Troop signed directly to a management company. They weren't signed directly to the company. In that type of situation, that's always happened. That's always been a thing where you've had artists sign to management companies, and then the management companies sign to the label. They do the deal with the label. And then what happens is the management gets the money, and then the artists get whatever they get. Same situation. But for Gene to do what he did, obviously, because Gene was already in the music business, but he's not the only person doing it. But he's learning that what he's doing, that's the industry standard.
Wow.
That's the industry standard for years. Even when you go back to the 30s and the 40s, when the guys were doing jazz records, Cab Calloway and those guys. When you sign to a manager, that manager owned you. That manager owned you. You couldn't do anything. You know, all of the Italian mob guys, they own the booking companies, they own the clubs, they own the venue. So if you wanted to do business with them, you had to sign contracts. Like, for example, there was one artist who was a jazz pianist. He signed a contract to where, and you had a Timmy interview where he was talking about contract perpetuity.
Yes.
Same situation with the jazz guys. So what happened with the jazz guys, you sign a contract with them. When the manager dies, the contract goes to his wife.
Wow.
When his wife dies, the contract goes over to his kids. You see what I'm saying? So, you know, when you look at that model had already existed. So when, you know, to all respect due to Gene, he wasn't the originator of that. He was following a business model that existed long before he arrived on the scene. So you're coming in and you're just signing people, and you're signing them to a management contract, but it's a management contract where you control everything. But he signed himself as a fourth member. So that means that not only is he taking a percentage as a group member, he's taking also a management fee. All right. He's also taking a producer fee. 3 different components. Charlie Wilson went through the same thing when he was with the Gap Band. Their record company owner was their producer, and he was also like a fourth member.
Wow.
So everything flowed through them. So at the time they're making all these big records, outstanding and all of that, they're broke. Everything that's going to them, all the houses that they're getting, all the cars they're getting, all through the manager. So that whole business model that we see, that is, you know, they learned it. You know, so if you look at black managers doing that type of stuff, they learned it, you know, from the white record industry. That was the one created. Jimi Hendrix the same way. As great great as he was, his manager kept 80, he kept 20, and his manager kept him on the road, kept him high, and just burned him out, kept him on the road. And when he tried to leave, a lot of strong arm tactics he used to go ahead and bring him back. So when you look in terms of who Gene was, Gene coming out of that, you're following that business model. So when you you create a contract and these guys are signing it, they don't know, but everything is flowing through him. But as long as you're an artist and you got your money, you got your car, you got your apartment, your condo, whatever you got, everything is sweet. But then what happens is you're basically an employee, you're basically an employee. So he's controlling every single thing. So that's the tragedy of them, is that the momentum that they had. And because of those shady business practices, that kept Teddy out of the running to win BMI awards, those BMI songwriting awards.
Yeah, because he wasn't
right around 88, 89, he was in the pocket. He should have been one of those BMI recipients. But because of his relationship with Gene and all the credits and all that stuff, he didn't benefit from that. So it wasn't until later, when his business got right, that he was able to benefit and start winning, more accolades and awards and all of that. But you've seen the interviews that he has in terms of credit, songwriting credit and publishing and royalties and all that stuff. And we look at that like it's crazy now, because artists are up on business practices.
Yeah.
Nowadays artists leave managers. They leave managers and go get new ones just like that. But back then, when you was with a manager, that was it. Wow. You were stuck. You were stuck with that manager, and you couldn't get out. And back then, you didn't have money to get a lawyer, or it was some street stuff that was actually going on that kept you under the thumb of that manager. And they couldn't get away until they did a deal with MCA for the second album, and that's how they were able to finally get away from him. But as far as lawyer fees and stuff like that, man, but it was rough. There are interviews Teddy talks about where, hey, I couldn't pay my taxes, I couldn't do this, I couldn't do that, because everything was tied up with Gene.
Now, so Teddy's the as much as I'm a big fan, he's the one person who at this point in time I haven't gone to interview. I've interviewed his engineers, his co-producers, his writers, his singers, his Timmy and Damien and everyone. I'm very soon probably Aaron Hall. So I'm still waiting for that opportunity. But one of the things that we're probably seeing recently is his events of what happened compared to what the others who have been on the show have said. Seem to be some conflicts. And somebody who studied history, I mean, what are your thoughts about the differences in sort of what some of his events of how things happen compared to what others who were there are saying?
My thoughts on it is, in one sense, from a human perspective, again, because we're content creators, we're writers or whatever, so we write and study the history that artists make. Artists make the history, we write about it. Now, depending on what side of the fence you're on, a person can look at people like us as like, yeah, you weren't there, so you don't know. But then I play devil's advocate and look at the artists that they were there in real time. They're going through all of the stuff. They're going through the creative process. They're doing the music, everything, but they're not historians. So they can talk about what happened to them because they experienced it. But to put it within the context, the chronological sequence of how it happened, because all you have to do is you play those interviews, you go back and you read some stuff, and you see a lot of gray areas. You see a lot of gaps. You see from a chronological standpoint, the dots are not connected. Dates are wrong. Like I just watched one that they were talking to him about the group disbanding in 1990. And he was like, yes, no, but the group didn't just, you put out an album in 1990. Now, whatever you were going on behind the scenes is what's going on behind the scenes, but you put out an album in 1990. So you didn't disband in 1990. You're going on tour 1990, 1991. So you're not disbanded. You eventually disband. So for somebody who's trying to follow that timeline and study the history of a group, because Guy is an enigma, you know, and it's important. And the reason why I say that is that here's a group that comes out. You come out in a period where the music is changing. You're at the forefront of it. But the industry is an older industry. So they're not necessarily looking at what you're doing as something that's original or something that's monumental or groundbreaking. Now, from a younger person, when I'm seeing them, the look, the vibe, the energy, the style, everything, it's great. But if you're an older person, you know, you might be looking at them, especially if you're an industry guy. Okay, it's the hot sound, but you're not looking at them as game changers because you're older. You don't understand it. So that means that here's a group that comes out in 88, but then they break up in 91, going into 92, 91ish, right? But you break up before SoundScan. Now, SoundScan evens the playing field for Black artists, because SoundScan, now you're able to track the sales of an album. You see, you're able to track the sales of an album. So based on the first week's sales, the album goes to the top 100. It goes to number one. So one, if you're tracking the sales, now all the funny bookkeeping, the funny accounting, that's not going to happen because you know how much you sold. All right. Another thing too, is going to expand your visibility, because even though Guy's doing these records, you know, at that time you don't have a lot of, you know, BETs out there, but you don't see Guy on a lot of platforms. The only existing platforms they're on that are out there, you see him on Arsenio Hall. You see him Showtime in the Apollo. I saw them once on Julie Brown's dance machine, or whatever her dance show was. So whatever was out there, they were doing it, but the platform did not exist. So and then they're a visual group. Plus, and then also you didn't have Double XL, you didn't have Source, you didn't have Spin Magazine, but they weren't capturing them. So you didn't have the synergy, the media synergy that was there that kind of really helped elevate them. And that's why people like us are very important, because by us seeing this, we have the ability to elevate these cats. The talent elevates them, but our observation and celebrating these people also takes them up that notch. But that didn't exist back then. It didn't exist. So Guy comes out 88, 89, 90. They do these records. But keep in mind that even though they're coming out and they have the sound, Bobby Brown emerges as the centerpiece. Even though his sound is influenced out of that whole Teddy Riley Guy thing, all right? I'll Be Sure. He becomes like a centerpiece. It doesn't mean that the fans don't love him and Guy's not blowing up, but I'll Be Sure. Keep Sweat. You got to realize, when the Guy album took a year to go platinum. I remember looking at a Right On magazine, and it had an image, they had an ad, and they were dressed in the white outfits that they had on the Groove Me video, and it had platinum. And I was like, wow, you know. And again, I was 18, 19, so I'm tracking it, but there are not a lot of media components that are out there. So the album sounds big, the songs are popular, but it takes them a year to go platinum. Now they go platinum 89, but then what happens is, in the midst of them going platinum, now they run into the issues with Gene. So by the time they hit the platinum component, Teddy's on his way out the door trying to leave Gene. You see what I'm saying? So when you look in terms of what they were, you know, they had an album. If they didn't come out with The Future, they would have had the one album, came out in 88, 89, they had issues with Gene, and we wouldn't have heard from him anymore. But thankfully, that wasn't the case, because Teddy was on fire, the group was on fire, they were able to sign directly to MCA, and of course, we know the rest is history. But once again, The Future drops in 1990. What happens? The album is fire, a lot of singles are coming off the album, but just like how Bobby Brown's album got lost through the cracks because Hip Hop Soul is coming, Guys dropping singles. Well, who's coming up behind them? Jodeci, Boyz II Men, the next wave of groups that are coming. So now Boyz II Men comes out with Coolie Harmony that sells, 5-6 million copies. And of course, sales, they have their place. And even though people will always love Guy, that pocket now that they were in, other groups are coming behind them.
Mm.
And they're kind of getting left behind. But just when they get their momentum, they break up. So when you look, they were of their time and they were before their time. But the tragedy was the management situation that they had. They came out in a period where the music industry was a lot older. So from a media perspective, they didn't get a lot of the notoriety and the respect. Because you got to realize when they came out in 87 and they were hot in 89, rap music was just starting to be pulled into the industry and embraced. It's a kind of style of music, this new jack swing thing. Okay, so still out. So everybody is like really leaning towards them. So it's not until 90, 91, 92 to where now the music industry is doing a complete changeover to where not everybody is starting to be younger. The artists are younger. The producers are younger.
Wow.
The executives are younger. But all of that, you gotta credit Guy. You can give Bobby Brown and New Edition some credit, but you got to really give Guy that credit for igniting that, because now that opens the door to where young brothers are seeing Teddy Riley, a young cat doing this thing. They say, well, hey, I can do it too.
Yeah.
So you see, so now the style of music, everything is kind of like pulling from that. So Guy is kind of like a catalyst in that, but they don't get a chance to see the benefits because of the way the industry setup was, the management, and the momentum.
Wow.
And then all of these disputes and everything that's going on with them, by that time, hip hop soul comes in. Whole different energy, whole different vibe. Still an extension of what they're doing, but throughout the 90s, they never picked the baton back up and jump back in the race for a variety of reasons. And of course, you see the interviews and you've done the interviews, so you kind of know. And that's basically the tragedy of that. And of course, there's going to be a sentimental connection we are going to have with those groups, because Guy's my all-time favorite group.
Yeah.
Because they remind me of the past, but they're also with the music of the future. Nobody was like them ever. I also wrote a piece at my Souls of Black Notes blog spot about Guy. Even when I go back and I look at, you spoke of Teddy Riley signed the contract for Sound of New York Records. Now later on, I found out that was Gene's old label. It just got reactivated, because Sound of New York was Gene's old label from the early 80s. Last Night a DJ Saved My Life, that was on Sound of New York Records. Okay. But man, to be 18, I think I was 89. So I was 19 years old. Yeah, I'm about 19 years old, almost 20. And to see a young guy signing a contract, having his own label, that was major. You understand? Nobody. Even though he was the vice president, of course, Gene, we know the Gene situation.
Yeah.
But to see somebody there signing a contract with his own record label in 1989, man, that was huge. We take it for granted now.
Yeah.
In 89,
yeah.
for Teddy Riley to have his own record label or be a vice president of a record label during that time,
yeah,
come on, man, that was just really, really major. And then to have the groups. Another major moment of that time was Rex and Effect did a performance at the Apollo Theater. At the time, the record New Jack Swing was out. Teddy comes out, performs the record. He starts naming the people, and they all come out on stage. So I'm seeing Big Bub, I'm seeing his family members, I'm seeing Rex, and it was like, wow, this is an empire in the making.
Yeah.
I'm listening to him doing my fantasy. You calling off Zan and this one and that one. And it's like, it was exciting to see.
Yeah.
It was exciting to see where they had an empire in the making with all of these artists, Redhead Kingpin, and just
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
records,
They're abstract, and so they, yeah,
and abstract, man. It's
yeah.
just, you had, and I remember buying the records, and anything that had his name on it back then, I was
Yeah.
buying it.
Deja.
And just to see it, Deja is another one. And here it is with Deja. I'm glad you brought them up because Deja was on Virgin.
Okay.
So when you look at the credits on the Deja album, there's a
Yeah,
lot of
there's no,
James Griffin
it
credits.
was no Teddy on Deja. Yeah.
He's got the arranger, co-production arranging credits,
Yeah.
but songwriting, Gene's name is on those records as a writer, as a co-writer.
Yeah.
But Bernard Bell wrote some songs on there. But I'm telling you, when you listen to the Deja album, there's a song out on there called More and More. And when you hear that, it's a ballad. And it has the thunderclap in the beginning and got the chords, and it sounds like a record that comes straight out of it. Could have been made, it could have been a lost track from Make It Last Forever.
Wow.
So when you go back and you listen to More and More by Deja, and because you love Make It Last Forever album so much, you can hear the chords and the whole, it's like Make It Last Forever.
Wow.
You hear it. But during that time, I think that's what it was, man, is that back then as a manager, you were signed directly to an artist, or an artist was signed directly to you. You controlled it. And remember, these guys were young. They didn't have any concept of the music industry. And back then, I mean, you watch the videos, the street energy was really important. So you needed cats either with you to control your artists, or if you're an artist, you needed street cats with you to keep you from being exploited.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate because, by them having Gene with them, it kept them from being exploited by outside forces, but they wound up being exploited anyway.
Yeah.
As a group.
Yeah, I mean, I know we could go on and loads of this has been great. What we'll do is we're gonna have to come back because
Sure.
and talk about Bernard Bell, because a lot of people keep hearing his name. Sadly, he passed away, and he had been struggling with a stroke for over a year, so we couldn't get to talk to him. But when we come back, we're gonna have to just focus on the magic of Bernard Bell, and I think one of the interesting things about what we've done today is that I was in Nigeria when Teddy came out, and when I watched New Jack Swing and he is naming all these people in the videos, I'm thinking this is the biggest person I can imagine, doing my fantasy and doing all that stuff. I could hear a track and said, oh, that's Teddy. And this is, I didn't have the rights on some Black Beats or anything like that. So he inspired me to just want to understand music, to buy an album and look at the credits and to see who wrote that stuff. And yeah, I knew about Don Real and all that stuff. And, the next time we get back together, it'll be interesting to find out what happened to Teddy's innovative production in the 90s, because it seems as if he was a trendsetter. But even the people who he overtook, like The Face and Jimmy and Terry, they kept going, and he seemed to have just kept regressing. So it'll be interesting just for us to focus on some of those things. But you wanted to.
Well, one part, I'll just go ahead in my perception of that, because there was a drop off in that. And I think that the reason why there's a shift, that momentum that he had late 80s, early 90s, and of course we know the another level album sold a lot, and we also saw the Dangerous album sell a lot. But one of the things that I think the momentum is up at that time, he's also trying to go ahead and start his labels and the business side. And sometimes when you're a creative person, there's the left brain and the right brain. Obviously, the left brain is the analytical side, business side, and then there's also the right brain, which is the creative side. So sometimes it's hard to kind of do both, because if you, in one of your videos, I think it was with Levi, he was talking about how it must have been Levi or Eric, and they talked about in the midst of the Another Level album, they missed out on a lot of touring because of Teddy's production work. You see what I'm saying? So what happens is, it's one of those type of situations. Once again, that's another component as well, because you wear all these hats. You're a business person, you're an artist, and you're a producer. So it's hard to do everything at once when you're like the centerpiece. So something is gonna go ahead and drop off, because there were acts, 911 and other groups that never really came out. You
Tammy
know,
Lucas, they had a total Tammy Lucas
yeah,
album that was
yeah.
completed by him and the Neptunes. And that Interscope gave them I gave them a budget to sign them, and they didn't release that. 911, they had the whole album, which was leaked. You know, they took songs from that and stuff. So it seemed, so that was those, because most of us knew about 911, not just because we saw them in the magazine, but there were little articles, and we couldn't wait to say this is a new thing and stuff. But and it just seemed, I never thought that he should have been in Blackstreet. I think that you know, he was, because John Marie and the rest said he was just on fire. But when he did the Blackstreet, he had to, you know, he either kept them from going on tour or he was going with them, and so the production work was just being left behind. The deal they had with MCA and our Interscope was to turn out music, but when he's doing it, trying to combine the two, it just affected everything. But I know we're short of time for stuff.
But there was the issue with Zamba too, is that, you know, they had some issues, and he eventually re-signed his deal with Zamba publishing deal. But there's a moment where there's little issues with Zamba, because he wasn't producing any acts on Zamba. The publishing deal was contingent on, you know, producing those artists, and it just wasn't happening or whatever, obviously. You know, but right around, I say 90, between like 93, 95 or whatever, he signed another deal with them. It was a better publishing deal with Zamba. But I just think that, you know, as we wrap this up, I look at Teddy as he's like a modern day Curtis Mayfield. Wow. Curtis Mayfield, if you know who he was, Curtis Mayfield was a creative guy. But what it was that he owned a label. He wrote and produced for everybody. So the thing about it is, this guy did 5 or 6 groundbreaking soundtracks. You know, if you can look them up, between 71 and 75, 76. Not only was he doing soundtracks, he was producing artists, he was making records for himself, he was producing his group, and he was trying to run a business. Wow. And along the way, a lot of people he could have signed, they slipped through the cracks because he just couldn't do it all. And I just think that with Teddy, you know, everybody's great at multiple things, but I think your infrastructure is extremely important. So when you look at like a Jay-Z and the Dame Dash, even though Jay-Z is undisputably talented, you got to have a Dame Dash to run interference. You always got to have somebody to run interference for you to be able to do all these things. I'm not saying that, you know, Teddy didn't have somebody to run interference, but it's just, when you are the star, you are the centerpiece, you are the glue, it's kind of hard. So now everything is changing, because his is the sample driven, his is all of those different things he was doing, but the style of music was coming in. He kind of fit right into that. But I would say probably right around like 2000, it really kind of like slowed down. I think he did Joe Stutter, worked with Joe in like about 2000, and it kind of just like tapered off because the style of music was changing. Also, it was more sample driven. You know, he's a musician by nature. You know, of course, music changes in cycles, but the business component, and then you're still dealing with the guy issues. You're still dealing with the Blackstreet issues. So they're recurring in the background amongst everything else. Yeah. So when you look at his career, regardless, still influential, made a lot of classic records that will never be duplicated. He inspired a lot of people to want to be in the music business. He's a catalyst. You know, guys are catalysts. the catalyst to everything that's happening now. You don't have a Puffy, without a Teddy. You don't have a Michael Bivins without a Teddy. It's just so much. And then in terms of God being a group, changing the dynamic, because even New Edition was a young group. New Edition, their packaging, their image was that of an older group. They had the suits and the ties and the bow ties. They were an image of an older group, even though we're a younger group. But Guy came, and they were the image. They were what a young R&B group should look like.
So is that why Heartbreak seemed to have been their biggest album, because they just shifted their styling from that?
Yeah, Heartbreak was it was almost the equivalent of what Don't Be Cruel was. It kind of, even though they had fans, Heartbreak was the album that really solidified them as a unit, visually, creatively, artistically, and obviously because they had Jam and Lewis. And Jam and Lewis, it's different. They had other producers and they made cool songs or whatever, but it was just, they were right in the pocket. The album came at the right time because there's a turnover. The new music is coming. Music videos are out. But at their core, it captured them who they were. And then, of course, when the videos came, it pulled them right into the mix, because you see them dancing, they're performing on stage, so everything is an extension of what it is that they do. So it captured who they were as an artist. And that's why people love that album. The other stuff, people like it, but for a lot of people, Any Heartbreak is where it begins. And it's the catalyst for those guys to go do what they do to build their legacy on the solo side and come back around again. And I think that's what, if Guy was able to do that, where they are today, they wouldn't be where they were. We love them, but it was always something. Management, industry, internal implosion, all of that, because they're three different individuals, or two individuals. You got a brother and you got the other individual. They're brothers spiritually, but also the person on the other side, he's a group member, but he's also a producer. So he's producing not only you, but he can produce everybody. So he can still be in the mix. But if you need him, to really be that missing piece, it kind of stalls them. You see that on the rap side with Pete Rock and CL Smooth. You see that with DJ Premier and Gangstar. There's a lot of records that Pete Rock did, that DJ Premier did, that were big records for other artists, that you wonder, what if you did those records within your unit, your group? And I'm sure they have reasons and all of that, but I think it's just that they were before their time, they were of their time, but there was so many landmines, so many things that really start their momentum. They should be higher in the canon of music. As music lovers, we're going to love them, but they're almost like, from a broader perspective, they're almost going to be like a footnote. It shouldn't be that way.
It shouldn't.
It's not meant to be disrespectful, because to me, that's my all-time favorite R&B group, but they didn't get to where they needed to be. And I hope they kind of able to turn around, because guys are getting older, man.
So Sheldon, tell people where they can find if they want to follow you, if they want to sort of read up on your stuff.
Yes. Check out Sheldon Taylor Souls of Black Notes at blogspot.com. I have over 100 plus written pieces, long form pieces, some are short form pieces that capture, the document music of the 90s, music of the 70s and 80s. They capture it in a historical context. There's a lot of references that I've referenced from other periodicals that I actually had. So what you were talking about stuff, this is not just stuff that's opinion driven. This is stuff that's actually thoroughly researched. So I'm also on all social media platforms, at Sheldtail, Instagram, Sheldon Taylor, Facebook. And I look forward to getting back with you again to kind of discuss this and just kind of flesh it out even further. But in the end, our legacy is to celebrate Guy, Teddy Riley, but also the music of the 90s, because it's such a special time that it's the jump off point. The way our parents loved music in the 60s, there are people who look at music of the 90s as their jump off period. When people talked about love and all these other different type of things. So when they hear Make It Last Forever, somebody that's 15 years old, that's like us listening to maybe a Luther Vandross record or a Stevie Wonder record.
Yeah.
So congratulations to you for really curating these interviews, making sure the history doesn't die. And I look forward to talking to you again.
Yeah, definitely.
Soon.
Yes, yeah, we're gonna do that soon, guys, because I mentioned Bernard Bell, and there's quite a number of stuff. But thanks, guys, for sticking with us. There was a lot of people that had some major comments that were coming through, but it was quite hard to balance it to be able to answer the questions. So next time when we do go live, we will be able to respond to the questions and stuff. So so guys, well, thanks for watching, and we'll be talking back soon.
Baby. Go ahead, Daddy. You're jingling, baby. Go ahead.